We are being led by the mafia right now. A top White House aide intervened to get a $620 million Pentagon loan for a company tied to Donald Trump Jr. Quote, "The call came from the White House. We have to get this done," said one person involved. Everything Republicans thought Hunter Biden was, Donald Trump Jr. actually is. Interviews and Defense Department records reviewed by ProPublica show that the request to loan hundreds of millions of dollars to the firm linked to Trump Jr. was made by Peter Navarro, a White House advisor to Donald Trump and a friend of Trump Jr.'s. And it gets even worse. After defense officials got the White House request, they asked Pentagon staff to move at an unusually rapid pace, said another person who was involved in the deal. The staff worked late nights and with little sleep to get the loan through in a matter of weeks. Quote, "The call came from the White House." It is corruption in broad daylight. I have no idea how people can just be okay with this and why it's not front page news every single day in this administration, because they are stealing from us. They are stealing from the American taxpayer to enrich the Trump family.
You fucking liberals understand how fucking stupid you are? Okay? So we tried to pass the SAVE Act, and you guys said, no, absolutely not. They asked for ID, that's voter suppression, it's a poll tax, it's this and that. Absolutely not.
The SAVE Act had nothing to do with showing your ID or asking for your ID. The SAVE Act was about proving your citizenship at the time you registered to vote.
So now you have conservatives, or anyone, I don't even think they're all conservatives, I think it's just people with a fucking brain, flying out to California to vote for Spencer Pratt that don't live in California, and you guys are going, oh, you can't do that, that's illegal.
There are no conservatives flying out to California to vote for Spencer Pratt. I wish they would. I've been begging them to all over social media for weeks now, but there aren't any. You know? Because the problem here is that you and about 386,000 other content creators that are making the same point is that when you hear voter ID, you think of a little plastic card with our picture on it. You forget that ID is short for something. It's an abbreviation. It stands for identification, right? We have voter ID laws in California. We identify the voter at the time of registration. We identify the voter at the time they walk into a polling location and cast their ballot. We identify the voter before we count their mail-in ballot. We have voter ID laws in California. But again, if you or any of your friends don't believe that to be the case, please, come try.
If they ask for ID, it's voter suppression. Same argument. Can't do that.
It's not the same argument. You think it's the same argument because you don't understand either argument that you're trying to make. You've never read the SAVE Act. You've never read up on California voter ID laws. See, what you thought is that you found yourself a little gotcha moment, so you wanted to film yourself making that point and then post it on the internet for all the world to see. But what you actually did was film yourself comparing apples to boots. Telling everybody all over the World Wide Web that you just don't know how anything works. So, but anyway, like I said, if you or any of your MAGA friends want to come to LA and try to vote for Spencer Pratt on Election Day, please be our guest. Let me know if you need a ride from the airport, if you're coming into Burbank. I'm not going to LAX for you guys, but let me know if you're into Burbank.
Well, Trump just totally took control of mail-in ballots. Yes, a federal judge has declined the stay on his mail-in ballot order, which means the Department of Homeland Security and the post office get to decide who gets to use mail-in ballots. I bet you they're not going to have any problem in red states. But everywhere else, the post office, which is ran by a Trump lackey, that's why you don't get your mail on time anymore, and the Department of Homeland Security is going to be in charge of deciding whether you're eligible to get a mail-in ballot. So I guess, screw the midterms, and you better get your ass up out of the whatever sick chair or wherever you're at. If you can't get out of your house, you better have somebody take you to an actual voting place, because Trump has overreached on us once again.
News just broke that Trump's Justice Department is launching a criminal investigation of E. Jean Carroll, the woman Trump violently assaulted. I don't have to say allegedly assaulted, because a jury has found Trump liable for that act. And a judge clarified that what Trump did can accurately be described with a word that begins with R. I'm only avoiding the word because it gets videos flagged on this site. I am not avoiding it because it's in any way legally incorrect. It is now an adjudicated matter that the President of the United States is a word that rhymes with ape mist. Trump owes Ms. Carroll more than $90 million. And this investigation into her appears to be exactly the type of weaponization of the Justice Department that Trump pretends has been happening against him. But we live in a bizarro world now where convicted criminals who beat up cops can get a $1.8 billion taxpayer-funded handout, while the survivor of a violent SA gets investigated. This sets such a dangerous precedent, sends a clear message that anyone who attempts to hold this president accountable for an act that he actually committed faces legal jeopardy.
Watch.
Are you losing control of the Senate Republicans?
I don't know. I really don't know. I can tell you, I only do what's right. I don't need money for the ballroom. I'm making a gift of the ballroom.
So wait, he just admitted that he doesn't know if he's lost Republicans, but don't you worry because he's gifting us this ballroom. And it's really frustrating people believe him because people like Wisconsin Congressman here, Derek Van Orden, are just fine with that. I know this because I constantly see comments letting me know that Trump's not using tax dollars to pay for the ballroom. No, seriously, at this point, if I had a dime for every time I heard that, I could fund it myself. So I wasn't remotely surprised to find out they tried to sneak $1 billion of our tax dollars into the budget bill. Not for schools, not for roads, not for farmers going bankrupt, not for small businesses being crushed by tariff chaos, not for workers, not for everyday Americans just trying to survive. No, for Trump's bunker. Ballroom. Let me say that again. Republicans tried to hide over $1 billion in our tax dollars as security upgrades connected to the project in a reconciliation bill. Which brings me back to this guy. Here's what you need to know about Derek. Derek voted to cut Medicaid after he promised families he would protect it. Wisconsin ER doctors are already raising the alarm about what these cuts are going to mean for their patients. He's offered nothing for small businesses who are drowning in tariff chaos or for farmers who are literally losing their farms. He even falsely claimed, "Our farmers understand that we have to level the playing field. And how do you do that? You do that with these tariffs." That's not how tariffs work, Derek. Look, bottom line, they tried to sneak $1 billion of our tax dollars into a building we will never step foot in. Well, most of us are struggling just to keep a roof over our own heads. And they got stopped. This time. But we know where Derek Van Orden stands. Wisconsin farmers, on their own. Wisconsin workers, on their own. But Trump's ballroom? Well, there. Derek Van Orden will find a way.
2 New York congresspeople won't say a fucking word about a president building a monument to himself, but they sure did help him take food off your table to pay for it. So Trump is building a 250-foot victory arch in Washington, D.C. Victory over what? Well, probably his victory over those pesky laws and Constitution. I mean, hell, 99.5% of public comments said that they don't want this, but the Commission of Fine Arts approved it anyway. You know the Commission of Fine Arts that Trump packed full of his butt-sniffing lapdogs. And when he was asked who this arch is for, Epstein's best friend said,
I know where it is, but who's it for? The Arc to Trump?
Meanwhile, Mike Lawler from New York 17, whose vote was the deciding vote, 215 to 214 on the big dog shit bill that slashed nearly $700 billion from Medicaid and over $250 billion from SNAP. The CBO says 16 million people lose health insurance nationwide. 1.5 million of them are in New York. He's silent on the arch. Loud as hell when it was time to gut your health care. Question for Mike. Is it true the acoustics in your head give Carnegie Hall a run for its money? And then you've got Claudia Tenney, New York 24, my congresswoman. She helped push that same bill over the finish line and couldn't even be bothered to respond to questions about the Medicaid and SNAP cuts she just voted for. But she did find time to introduce a bill making Trump's birthday a federal holiday, calling him the founder of America's golden age. Question for Claudia: is it blissful to lack the required equipment to experience a brain freeze? So to recap, these two fight like hell to strip 42 million Americans of their SNAP benefits and cheer on stripping kids of Medicaid. But when there is a 250-foot arch for a guy who told a 9-year-old he'd be dating her in 10 years, both of our New York reps helped pay for it by taking food off of your fucking table.
Breaking news from overnight, the IRGC says that it has targeted an American base, as Kuwait says that it has activated its air defenses and it has downed multiple Iranian drones and missiles. There is no confirmation from the US or Iran if any of these missiles or drones actually hit this American base. Oil surged this morning as the United States and Iran started shooting at each other again. This is also as Israel told southern Lebanon, the people there, to evacuate so Israel's forces can move in. The Greater Israel Project is in full swing, and Donald Trump is coming along just like the lapdog that he is. Donald Trump has put more effort into stopping the Epstein files than he has raising your paycheck or lowering the cost of goods and services. This is actually a fact. He has replaced people that have voted for the Epstein files to be released. At the same time, he's making your costs and everything else more expensive. He has lied to you on every turn of the way. For someone who has campaigned on lowering costs and stopping these forever wars, Donald Trump has single-handedly been responsible for 27% of the entire national debt for the United States. And his term is still not over. At the end of Barack Obama's term, Barack Obama contributed 24% of the national debt in his 2 terms. Donald Trump has already exceeded this, and he still has 2 years left. This war was not supposed to happen. This debt crisis was not supposed to get worse. Donald Trump has taken you for a ride as he builds his ballroom and his UFC fight night, and he's doing everything that he can to make sure that his life is the best that it can be. He's pumping and dumping the stock market every time he's talking about a peace deal or aggression or anything like that. He's making himself a lot of money along with his friends. Donald Trump may be the worst thing that has ever happened to the United States of America. Until next time, guys, drop a follow on TikTok, drop a follow on Instagram, support my work with $5 a month on Instagram to subscribe or with a Venmo in my bio. Love you guys. Talk to you later.
What do you say to a man that loves Donald Trump more than he loves his own wife? You guys will not believe what happened to me today. And it was very fleeting. It happened very quickly. Stopped at a gas station to get gas. I'm filling up my Ford F-150, just started, and a Jeep pulls in directly on the other side of the pump. The guy gets out, puts his card in, starts pumping his gas, and he comes around the gas pump to throw a cup or a drink or something away in the trash can next to the pump, and he sees me. And I get this double take, and it's become more and more familiar now, especially when I've got my red Cardinals hat on. I'll get the double take, like, I know that guy from somewhere. And finally, after about 2 minutes, he comes back around the pump, and he goes, "Are you the guy on TikTok that talks about farming and healthcare and schools and that kind of thing?" And I said, "Yeah, that's probably me." And you can always tell right at the beginning of the conversation, like somebody is kind of sizing up what approach do they take. Anyway, long story short, we're talking, and he's telling me that he voted for Donald Trump all 3 times. And I'm trying to be, polite, because who wants to have a confrontation at a gas pump at a gas station? And anyway, I said, "Is there anything," we get to kind of to the end of the conversation, and I just said, "Is there anything you disagree with him about?" And he said, "Yeah." He goes, "I've got some problems with his policy on birthright citizenship." And I said, "Well, what is it about his policy on birthright citizenship that you don't like?" And he said, "You listen to this, guys." He said, "My wife's parents were undocumented immigrants, and she was born in this country. She's a birthright citizen." And I just looked at him, and I got to be honest with you, before I even thought about it, I said, "You voted for a man that wants to deport your wife out of the country." I said it before I even thought about the confrontational nature of it. And he just looked at me. He just looked at me. Didn't say another word. Turned around, walked back to his truck, took the gas pump out, got in his truck, and drove off. This guy's wife is a birthright citizen, and Donald Trump wants to deport her out of this country to a country that she's never been to or lived in. And he voted for him 3 times, knowing that that's his policy. And all he could say was, "I kind of disagree with his policy on birthright citizenship." Unbelievable. Unbelievable.
Hey everybody, I want to tell you about another tool our government is using to manipulate the justice system and violate our rights. I'm Liz Oyer, the former pardon attorney for the Department of Justice. This week, a judge in Minnesota unsealed 5 search warrant applications in the case of Don Lemon. Search warrants are commonly used to collect evidence, but there are rigorous legal standards that apply. To get a search warrant, the government must convince a judge that the thing they want to search is likely to contain evidence of a crime. That's called probable cause, and a federal officer actually has to swear to it under penalty of perjury. Here's the application in Lemon's case, which was signed by a DHS agent. The search warrant process is normally confidential, meaning the defendant has no chance to object and the public has no right to know. But this week, the judge in Lemon's case released 5 search warrant requests made by the government, all of which were rejected by the court. That alone is extraordinary. But even more stunning is what the government was looking for. They were trying to get personal identifying information for all subscribers to Don Lemon's YouTube channel. Here's a quote from the court. The warrant seeks subscriber information in any form kept, including names, mailing addresses, residential addresses, business addresses, and email addresses of subscribers, the telephone numbers of subscribers, and the internet protocol addresses from which the Don Lemon Show was accessed, among other information. Lemon's YouTube channel has 1.3 million subscribers. What does the federal government want with the personal data of all those people? Nothing good. Fortunately, the judge was paying close attention and he shut this down. He said the government failed to explain why a comprehensive index of subscribers to the Don Lemon Show is evidence that a crime was committed. So he denied the warrant. But here's the thing. This was an attempt to pull a fast one. The government was exploiting a legal process that is one-sided, where the defendant cannot object. They were taking advantage of the secrecy of the process, so none of Lemon's subscribers could object. And they were taking advantage of the trust of the court. A federal agent swore under oath that this information was needed as evidence of a crime. As it turns out, the government's credibility with the courts is so shot that this didn't work. We can be grateful that the court shut it down, but it should not have gotten this far. This is the same type of misconduct we are seeing with grand juries, where prosecutors are lying and cheating behind closed doors to make cases. If anyone in your life is not yet convinced that the ongoing abuses of the justice system affect all of us, please share this example. The fact that our government could try to make you part of a criminal investigation just because you watch a certain YouTube channel should be truly alarming to all of us. You may not be on Donald Trump's enemies list, but that does not mean your rights are safe.
Why the press has never held Trump accountable for what he says. There's a psychological reason for that. Philosopher Nicholas Shackle at Cardiff University identified a new fallacy in a 2005 paper published in the Journal of Metaphilosophy. He called it the Motte and Bailey fallacy. Here's what that is. Medieval castles had 2 parts to them. The Bailey was the open, comfortable land where people lived and worked every day. The motte was a dark, cramped, fortified tower nobody wanted to be in. When outside attackers came, the people would retreat to the safety of the motte, the fortified castle. When the attackers left, the people moved right back out into the Bailey and acted like nothing happened. Trump does this every single day. The Bailey is the outrageous claim. Immigrants are poisoning the blood of our country. Or, I'm running again in 2028, when we all know that's against the Constitution. You challenge him on it, he retreats to the motte, the fortified tower, by saying, that was just a figure of speech. I never said that. You're taking me out of context. And the moment scrutiny dies down, he walks straight back into the Bailey and makes the same insane claim again. He gets the full emotional power of the most dangerous statement possible, without ever having to defend it. This is not an accident. This is a deliberate strategy. Say the outrageous thing, retreat when challenged, return when safe, repeat the same outrageous claim forever. And nobody has ever made him pay for a single word of it. No one holds him accountable. Not the media, not the courts, not his own party. By the time he retreats and claims it was out of context, everyone has already heard the insane claim. The damage is done. The lie is planted. And he walks away clean every single time. That is not a bug in our system. That is him breaking the system on purpose, causing chaos. And everyone is too scared to lose their place, to not be allowed back in, too scared to say anything or hold him accountable. A man who faces no consequences for his words will eventually have no limits on his actions. The press corps has a microphone in front of him every single day, and they keep letting him get away with it. And until we hold him accountable, nothing will ever change.
Well, well, well. That was fast. I just filmed the video. And then this popped up, expeditiously. Milli Vanilli and Morris Day say they won't perform at the Pedo and Chief's linked Freedom 250 DC shows. A day after the pedo-in-chief's affiliated Freedom 250 announcement, the first wave of performers for the Great American State Fair shows on Washington's National Mall in June and July, Milli Vanilli and Morris Day are among the scheduled acts who have said they will not be appearing. Day and Young MC issued statements on social media disputing Wednesday's announcement for the Freedom 250, while Milli Vanilli singer Jody Rocco told the Associated Press that neither she, her sister Linda, nor any of the other group members had been asked to come. My sister and I were shocked to see our name, Milli Vanilli, as one of the performers, Jody wrote in an email. A Freedom 250 spokesperson did not immediately respond Thursday to a request for comment. Freedom 250, which the pedo launched late last year, describes itself as a national nonpartisan organization leading the celebration of our nation's 250th birthday. The pedo appointed Keith Karch, who served as an undersecretary of state during his first term, as the organizer's CEO. I have a feeling before the day's over, we're going to hear that the Commodores are not gonna show. I'm sure, though, Vanilla Ice needing a paycheck today and being a mediocre-ass white man who supports this regime here in the US of A, he'll be performing his, one or two songs that we all know. Did he even have 2 hits? I really don't think so. No. One-hit wonder. Anyway, glad to hear that some of them were like, no, It kind of like that little shit show for Turncoat USA, Turn Tricks and shit. They were going to do their halftime show and they added Ludacris and all sorts of names to the list, and everybody stepped up expeditiously and said, you didn't fucking call me. I don't know what you're trying to say, but I ain't rolling with you today. It's gonna end up being fucking Lee Greenwood, Kitty Crack Rock, and Vanilla Ice. How pathetic. Thank you, Milli Vanilli, for stepping up to the plate. Come on, Commodores. You're next.
All right, so I saw a couple of TikToks on this morning, and I had to go kind of hunting for the news story. So I'm looking at an article on NPR. A federal judge this morning in the District Court of Washington, D.C., so that's the trial court level in Washington, D.C., Judge Carl Nichols, who was appointed to this court by Donald Trump, is leaving in place for now Donald Trump's most recent executive order that calls for restricting voting by mail. And he issued, this was the second executive order on mail-in voting that he has issued. The first one was issued in 2025. That one was halted by a court in Washington State. And this one was allowed to stand for now by a DC Circuit Court judge. It's super convoluted. There were some similar lawsuits filed to stop this executive order in a federal court in Boston, and we're still waiting on rulings from that court. So there could be a conflict here. This ruling is going to be appealed. The good news is that it's going to be appealed to the DC Circuit Court, the Washington, D.C. Federal Court of Appeals. By and large, the Washington, D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals has had very little tolerance for Donald Trump's bullshit on any number of issues, whether it's related to immigration policy or tariffs and things like that. They're really just not having it with him. So that's a ray of hope here. And this ruling came from a judge that was appointed by Donald Trump. So it's like you really kind of have to take that into consideration with these kinds of rulings now. But I'll do this in 2 parts. The main argument of the plaintiffs in these cases is that the president, as an office, according to Article 2 of the Constitution, has absolutely no role in elections at all and is not granted any power. The president is not granted any power whatsoever in Article 2 of the Constitution over elections or voting. In Article 1, that deals with Congress, the House and the Senate, there's very, very limited language in there that says that the Congress can do some regulations regarding voting, but zero power to regulate anything with elections and voting for the president in Article 2. And in the past, Congress has exercised that power I mean, I think the most obvious example is establishing election day so that would be consistent nationwide. But in this, and I mean, I'll say another comment too. Who knows what Donald Trump actually believes? Whether he actually believes that mail-in ballots and fraud with mail-in ballots are the reason, according to him, the 2020 election was stolen from him. You know, we've seen them, the Trump people, attack voting machines to the point that Fox News had to pay Dominion Voting Machines, that company, almost $800 million in a defamation lawsuit a couple of years ago, because all of their hosts were saying on air repeatedly that Dominion Voting Machines were used to steal votes from Donald Trump and give them to Joe Biden. No evidence for that. That turned out not to be true. And Dominion filed a defamation lawsuit, and Fox News paid them almost $800 million. But when it comes to mail-in voting and mail-in ballots, that system, like, I'll put it this way. I've heard Rick Wilson from the Lincoln Project talk about this frequently. He's like, we are the ones that got that set up. We were the driving force behind that. Republicans, he said, in Florida, we were the ones that came up with that and got that in place. And so it's like when Donald Trump issues executive orders that are going to muck up mail-in ballots, there's no mechanism in these executive orders to delineate or specify that it's going to negatively impact mail-in ballots from Democrats. It impacts mail-in ballots for everybody. And there are tens of millions of Republicans all across this country who vote in elections using mail-in ballots. And so, you know, regardless of what happens with this particular order, if something like this were to go through, it would affect Republican voters almost as much as it would affect Democrat voters. And so again, it's just, his executive orders are almost gibberish when you read them. And obviously he's not writing them. And we saw some reporting, it was either earlier this year or late last year, that almost all of Donald Trump's executive orders are being written by Stephen Miller. And during the 4 years that Trump was out of office, Stephen Miller set up this legal nonprofit, you know, like law-related nonprofit, to file lawsuits all across the country against woke and against DEI and shit like that. And, you know, again, as with all of those things, the whole thing was a grift. It turned Stephen Miller into a multimillionaire and allowed he and his wife to purchase like a $6.5 million house outside of Washington, D.C., which they abandoned last year, by the way, because their neighbors knew who they were, and their neighbors were writing protest messages on the sidewalk in front of Stephen Miller's house using sidewalk chalk. Nobody wrote any threats or anything like that, but they were just, you know, Stephen Miller's a piece of shit, you know, whatever, that kind of thing. And Stephen Miller and his wife felt so threatened by that they abandoned their $6.5 million home. They put it on the market, and now they're living in military housing on a military base, which I love that for him. He deserves every second of that. But it's just some insight into how much of a gigantic pussy Stephen Miller really is. But this latest executive order, it like calls on DHS and Social Security Administration and the Post Office like to come up with a list of every eligible voter in the United States and to only deliver mail-in ballots to those individuals if you're on that list. So they can do a lot of monkey business with that list. And I think that's one of the main concerns. And so this is going to be appealed immediately to the DC Circuit Court of Appeals, which is just stacked with judges who have been standing up to Donald Trump over the last 18 months. A similar executive order from a year ago was already halted by a federal court in Washington, D.C. And as I said, there were similar lawsuits filed against this particular executive order that are pending in a federal court in Boston right now. And Donald Trump votes by mail. So, yeah, this is a bad ruling from this judge, but it's like I'm not getting my hair on fire over this yet. And even, I mean, we're coming up on 5 months before Election Day. I don't think that this is anything that could actually be put into place in time for the 2026 midterms to have any impact or effect on the 2026 midterms. But with this Supreme Court, who knows, man? I mean, they issued their ruling doing away with the Voting Rights Act in a case out of Louisiana, and early voting for the Louisiana primaries had already started. And this Supreme Court gave that order. They put that order in. And the governor of Louisiana halted the primaries and essentially vacated the votes of over 40,000 people in Louisiana to redraw their maps. So again, it's just like trying to predict what happens in these cases with this Supreme Court has become impossible, because this Supreme Court has become so undependable and unreliable and so activist and so partisan. But I'm pretty confident right now that the DC Circuit Court of Appeals is going to put a stop to this. But we'll keep an eye on it, but I'm not worried about it right now.